Welcome to Retech and our retro review. This is a second part of our retro review series, and basically it's what's happened across the last month within this channel. Now, one of the big things I'd like to say before I start is concerning RetroBrighting. Now, this hasn't particularly been featured on this channel for a while because I've never been a huge fan of RetroBright, as you probably know, and the reason for that is because it doesn't work. After a little time, maybe a year to 2 years, 3 years or so on, the actual product starts to go back to its original color, because you can't take away the free radicals in the plastic that turns it brown or yellow or whatever color it's not meant to be, because the fire retardant that they put in the plastics throughout the kind of 80s and 90s eventually turns the plastic to a kind of a sort of a brownish kind of yellowish color. Now, if you got a black machine on black plastics or other colors such as blues, etc., it doesn't show up so much. It's only on the fawny kind of beigeish kind of look of the machines that were out there, such as the Amigas, the Commodore 64s and so on, and you'll notice that painted machines like this TRS-80 just at the back here will always stay the same color. Now, here's just a little snip from the 8-bit guy on RetroBrighting. This is what he's found out recently.
In fact, I'm going to have to re-RetroBright my original Apple IIc that I did a restoration on back in 2016. So that was 6 years ago. And the interesting thing is, this computer didn't start to turn yellow again until about 4 years after the original restoration. It has not been exposed to UV light or heat or any of the things that we know to accelerate the process. So I have been actually considering clear coating some of these machines after I'm done retrobrighting them. The idea being that if you can keep the oxygen away from the plastics, then hopefully they won't turn yellow again.
And you'll notice that, you know, even now everyone has to admit that there's got to be a better way than retrobrighting these machines. I mean, the keys, yeah, you can retrobright this slightly thicker and they take a little bit longer to actually start coming back through to their original kind of yellowy browny color, but the cases themselves are that thin on all of these kind of retro micros that they don't stand up to retrobrighting too much, because they end up getting even more brittle. And if you've got an Apple Mac Performer, the CRT model, you'll know that the cases fall apart around the machines. I mean, they literally disintegrate. I've got two. I've got one which is in very good condition, but it's starting to crack. And I've got another one which is just falling apart around itself. So I don't know what I'm going to do with that one, because the machine actually functions properly. But eventually even my good one's going to end up disintegrating. Now, retrobrighting something like that is a no-no. It'll basically kill it forever. So what I decided to do a long time ago, now look at some of my previous videos on the restoration of the Atari STs, etc., is to not retrobright them, is to make sure that the cases are in good condition, reinforce them if necessary on the inside. One of my Atari Mega STs, I had to rebuild the keyboard because it just shattered, the casing just disintegrated. And I use automotive products which are flexible enough to keep the keyboard case in one piece, and then also to restore it with the original color. And I've done that with the Atari STs. This is a 520 ST which has been cleaned and painted in the as close to correct color as possible. And even on this one I didn't retrobright the keys because they're going to go back to that original color eventually. I mean, this is one of the least yellow keyboards that I own. I've got two that are really white. But at the end of the day, this case will last a lot longer, simply because it's got a coating on the outside. So anything that kind of tries to attack it has to get through the coating first, and that's going to be the only way we're going to be able to save the look and the feel of these machines going forwards, because I don't think RetroBrighting was ever the key, and I don't think it ever will be. As far as choice is concerned, it's completely up to you which route you go. I know that I've done machines 3 years ago and I've repainted them and restored them that way, and they're still just about perfect. They may have a couple of nicks and scratches on through use, etc., but they are perfect. There's no yellowing coming back through the case. And as David Murray did say, and it's a very good admission, it's very good that he's actually thought about this, because he thought about clear coating the machines. That will stand the test of time. Clear coating will stop if it's a UV automotive protective clear coat. It will slow down the process. It will stop most of the UV getting to that machine or the machine underneath the clear coat. But the problem you got is you're going to get creep from the underneath of the plastics due to heat, etc., or where it's stored, or just the chemical reaction of the plastics breaking down further, leaching through again. So that's going to affect the colour underneath the clear coat eventually. Don't know how long. I've got a good idea, because in the automotive industry, if you have a red car, even with the best intention and the best clear coating system in the world, that red colour will start to lose, because some UV and some effects from radiation and the sun does get through to that paint, and it will eventually burn it through. So you're probably extending the life of having to redo it up to about sort of 8 or 9 years, which is kind of what you'd find on a car. So I kind of think the best protection is the original color, because that's going to get affected less, because it's actually a coating on top of the plastics. And thinking about it, you should really do both sides of the case if you want to give it that kind of 100% protection. So yeah, I think overall RetroBrighting was a good kind of quick fix to get them looking nice, and don't think anybody really knew the effects long term of RetroBrighting. But there's always been that case of when you put something together after RetroBrighting, it feels a lot creakier, it feels a lot less plastic, as in it has no plasticity left in the case itself. So I think, you know, it's always one of those things. It's whether you want to have something to look like it came out of the factory, or you just want something to work, be in one piece, and also represent its aging, because they're all going to age that way. So yeah, it's up to you. Paint RetroBright clear coat. My money is to put it on painting and get it close to original color as possible. I mean, I did an Amiga case, and it's slightly lighter than a lot of the Amigas that are out there, but then I compared it to photographs of original Amigas when they were brand new, and there's still a shade difference depending where they were built. So you're never going to be 100% accurate on absolutely everything, and RetroBrighting does the same. It kind of over bleaches things. So if you've ever done an Atari ST, it will actually stripe the plastic, so it'll over bleach it in places. So yeah, your choice. Moving on to our next videos that we've done and what we've covered. We've done quite a lot, actually. I do quite a lot of videos in a 4-week period. I've kind of slowed down a little bit over the last week, because I've got a few things that I want to put right and make sure they're fine for other videos and future videos. But we've done quite a lot. I mean, we've covered 40 years of the Epson HX20, the world's first true laptop, and it is a fantastic machine. It doesn't get a lot of recognition, and a lot of people don't even realize it exists, and it's 40 years old. And at the end of the day, it's a machine that's been around for 40 years, is still alive after 40 years, which is amazing because it has an internal battery pack in it to use it as a portable machine, which should have by this time have kind of given up the ghost and maybe exploded and split. So yeah, the machines survive very, very well, and in the wild though, out in the open, they're not surviving quite so well. They are getting issues with the batteries, which is causing them to fail. They are getting capacitor failure as well, and also the worst problem and the hardest one to actually fix is the screen. The screens are starting to fail across them as well, but mine's generally in very good condition as it is, but it's always locked away and it's always kept in a case like this. Now, there are a few people who will say, well, it's not really the first true laptop computer, but it's as close as you were ever going to get in the 80s. You got to figure out the Osborne one at the time was a horrendous chunk of hardware. Then you had the Amstrad's condensed desktops into a foldable kind of luggable platform. Again, not really a laptop. Where this machine was about as close as you were ever going to get to a portable true laptop of the time. And they're great. They're great little machines. They are basically usable today if you could find some applications for them. For example, if I could find the barcode scanner, I'd actually barcode up a lot of my stuff and use that machine just to scan the data in. I mean, I could use this, a normal laptop, which is far smaller, far lighter, far more powerful, and I could get a cheap barcode scanner and off I'd go. But just try and put some of these classic and vintage machines to use, because it's something that if you've got one, you might as well use it rather than seeing it kind of slowly decaying in its case or its box, and then when you want to use it, you find out it doesn't work at all. And on the fun side, we did the review of the Petsky Robot, or rather Marcus did the review for me, because it's kind of a game aimed at that kind of age group. I know the 8-bit guy David Murray is probably going to say no, it's not, but it is. It's a game that's predominantly aimed at people who were around Marcus's age at the time when these machines were launched, and it's very similar in its kind of gameplay to a lot of the games that were out there at the time. Again, he's going to take umbrage at that, but it's a compliment because it's a very good game and it's very, very marked from its time period, which I'm guessing was kind of the point when he wrote it as well. There's no point using an emulator and bugging all the memory in and making it so it can't run on a Commodore 64 or a genuine piece of classic vintage hardware. And he's done a very good job of it, and it was a nice machine. I've played it and it's been a nice game, and I've played it quite a few times since, and it's less of a shoot 'em up and more of a kind of puzzle game, which is I think what Marcus said in the video anyway, and he's also enjoyed it, and he's been using some of the classic Commodore hardware to do it because it's having issues running on its Commodore 64 Maxi, but I haven't really had time to solve that problem, but I will do eventually when I get around to doing everything else that I'm have to do and supposed to be doing. You know what it's like with time. So yeah, it was nice to review a game. I know it's been out a while, and the reason I do games and even hardware after the initial kind of hoo-ha and wow, isn't this great kind of stuff's died down is because I like to do a bit more of a pragmatic view of things. And as I said, I did that on the Amigas, the Amiga 500 Mini rather, and also the Retro Games 64 and VIC-20s, the Minis and the Maxis. And because of that, I'm sure a lot of people who viewed them with rose tinted glasses are a little bit annoyed, but you can't live your life through rose-tinted glasses. If somebody produces a product, then basically it has to be reviewed as that product, not as something that it was 30, 40, 50 years ago and so on. But yeah, on the whole though, a little bit of an aside, I do like their products. I think their A500 Mini's got a lot better since their updates and their releases. So yeah, again, Petsky Robots, which is a fantastic game on a fantastic vintage platform, is a very good game, and Marcus has thoroughly enjoyed, and so have I on the occasions that I've played it. So yeah, well done. It's a fantastic little game, and to be honest, I think we need more and more of these kind of independent programmers and games producers to keep on pumping out games and making nice games for these machines, because at the end of the day, if you don't have a reason to get out a classic and vintage machine, wire it up, cable it up, get it working on your CRT or your LCD monitor or whatever you're using with it, plugging in the joysticks, make sure it works, go into all of that hassle to get it working. And if there's no reason to do that, for example, no new games, no new software, etc., then they won't be used. They'll just be left in a corner, or left as a trophy piece on somebody's display shelf, and that's really not where we want them to be. We've kept them alive, so to speak, for over 40 years, so let's keep on going. Yeah, demos, games, productivity software, everything, anything that anybody wants to kind of produce and has produced, just get it out there. Someone will have a use for it. Doesn't matter how big or how small the audience is, someone will have a use for it. So yeah, get writing, guys, just see what you can do. We also covered the Auric 1, and that was a machine that really struggled to find a foothold. It struggled to find a foothold in most markets. It did really well initially, did really well in France, but then after the initial run, the whole kind of furore around the machine started to die down, and the shortcomings of that machine became evident. And then the problem with that is that once the shortcomings became evident and Auric failed to fix them, especially the tape loading routines, then people were kind of starting to shy away from the machine to more established brands, to machines with more software, more support, etc. And that's eventually what killed the Auric, really. The Atmos, it's kind of slightly bigger brother with a nicer keyboard and nicer colours on the case. Well, arguably I prefer the original colour scheme, and I have got to like the original keyboard after all this time. It did a nice job of being a microcomputer. It was a nice little machine. It had a lot of potential, but bunglings by the company, the usual issues that these startups, remember they were all startups at the time, had in procuring finance and premises and, you know, everything that goes along with running a business. Well, they didn't actually do very well. They failed. They grew too fast, too quickly, and then they failed. And that's a shame, because it had a lot of potential. And arguably, it was better than the ZX Spectrum. Arguably, it was better than a lot of other machines, such as the TI-99 and the Commodore VIC-20, etc. So it wasn't a bad machine. And even put up against its immediate rivals, such as the Dragon 32. Now, out of the two, it would be a push to choose the Dragon over the Auric, which had a better colour palette. It was a better all-round machine. It wasn't just built off of a Motorola spec sheet. And for that, you've got to give the company credit for producing a machine almost from the start. It was their own design all the way back to the Microtan. So yeah, it's a shame it didn't do as well, and it's a shame it faded away, but it's one of those machines that have kind of been forgotten with time. So if you've got one, the Atmos or the Auric one, well, try and keep it running, use it and enjoy it while you can and keep it running. Okay, so yeah, it's just one of those machines that have kind of faded into history. Now, it seems to have been a bit of a theme this month. I've been kind of not picking on but commenting on other YouTubers, retro YouTubers kind of videos, and not in a bad way either, because there's one that was brought out by Retro Recipes, Perifractic, and it basically was titled, and I'll read it off the screen, Retire Your Amiga. And I watched that and I thought, yeah, he's got a point. Now if you watch my video I'll go into it in a lot of depth, but he does have a point. He has a point on the usability side, which I agree with, because I've built a lot of recreated machines from the 64, VIC-20, ST Amigas and so on, even the TI-99 and Commodore 64s, all of that kind of stuff. And they're great because it's just literally plug it in, use it and play on them, and use them as you would an original machine. Now his idea was to take the Amiga 500 Mini or the A500 Mini, you can't use the Amiga word, and put it in an Amiga case, and then get Workbench running on it and so on, and use it as an Amiga to put his classic and vintage one away, which is a good idea. His reasoning was that if you use it less, it'll survive longer, and it's a very good, valid train of thought. And you know, for a lot of cases and a lot of components, it'll actually do that just as he said. But for a lot of other components, they won't. Components that need to be recharged and reused on a regular basis will not actually survive hibernation long term. And it's, as I said in my video, it's a case of putting the initial spike of power through them does most of the damage, which is why most of them fail on initial switch on or just shortly after. But you know, it's a nice thing to do, is to replicate vintage machines in a modern format using modern hardware, because you will be able to use them a lot longer even after your vintage and classic machine fails. And I thought that was a really good kind of way of trying to put some longevity into these platforms. And even after they fail, you still have a not quite a facsimile, but a working copy of the original machine with all of your original software and games and so on, so you don't lose that side of it. You see, I'm kind of in the camp of the software is just about as important, if not as more important, than the physical hardware, because we can emulate the hardware. So where would games like Monty on the Run be if we let the software die? Because the physical hardware can be reproduced in emulators on a PC and so on, so you'd always be able to experience the games and the programs and the software of these classic machines and run games like Monty on the Run, etc., whatever game you're into, and you'd be able to experience that nostalgia feel and how they were written and sounded and the graphics looked and so on. Now, letting the software disappear with bit rot and all of that kind of stuff that's going on now, well, it's gonna not matter if you've got the hardware. Without the software, the hardware's pretty much a dead duck. It's pretty much just a museum piece, because without the hardware, as I said, we can replicate it, we can basically recreate it on a modern machine. But without the software, you don't know what the machines were capable of, and you don't know what they could do and what they looked and sounded like and so on. So yeah, in many ways the software is as important, or if not more important, than the physical hardware itself. You know, if you put modern components in a vintage case and it looks and feels the same, does it matter really to most people? Does it matter to the outside world, as long as you can get the look and feel via the software and the workbenches and the TOS and so on? Now, also this month I've done 2 videos on Lambda. I know it's not retro, but I just, when you see the claims and read the claims and see all of the I've got to say, bull videos that are out there about this person, this Mr. Lemoyne, who claims that the Lambda system is sentient, it's self-aware, and then you listen to his claims and you listen to how he sounds and how he talks about it through various different interviews, and then you read about his faith, and you kind of roll that up into one little ball, and you find, and it's not hard to come to the conclusion, that he wants it to happen more than it actually is. He's an evangelist, he's a futurist who wants the future to happen now. And the likes of Chuck Peddle was exactly the same. He literally had to wait 40 years to get to a point of today where he was hoping his yesterday would have been. And that's not a bad thing. We need futurists, we need people to think ahead and wonder what if, because that's how things are created, because we go down that path. You know, from the Star Trek era with the communicator, which is now a mobile phone, and so on, and we go down that path. The crystal for their memory crystals, which are our USB keys and USB sticks, etc., and our SD cards. You know, we've gone down that path, although we call them something different and they may look very different, but our thoughts of what we wanted the future to be are formed by these thoughts. So he claimed that, Blake Lemoyne claimed that Lambda was sentient, and if you look at my videos, I did his script live. I basically got it up on a laptop and went through it live. I didn't read it beforehand, I just literally commented on it as it happened. And you know, as I said in that video, he had some good points and he made some good points, and you know, he wasn't completely out there, as in, you know, I'm completely David Icke here, but it wasn't completely coming from a fact-based, it was coming from more of his moral side and his religious side. And you know, you can kind of see that if somebody whose religious side of it really thinks that everything and every object, regardless of what it is, whether it becomes to a point where we or he or they think it's alive or sentient, then it needs to be protected. Now, yeah, that's, you know, you can understand where he's coming from. But then if you go out and you watch how Google developed Lambda and their tests originally of it narrating a story, and their tests originally of it being asked direct questions other than the third party, and it's not a bad system. You can see exactly how it was structured to work, and it's a great system. It's one of the best AI systems technically that we have at the moment. It's my belief by what I've seen on it, and it's one of the most human-like in its responses that we've seen. And whether it will pass, as Blake Lemoyne wanted, the Turing test, well, it's already done that. It's already passed the Turing test. You see, if you take somebody from Alan Turing's era and sit them in a room with Lambda and a human asking very much the same questions, they'd be very, very hard pushed to tell that Lambda wasn't real. Now, I believe that's actually passed the Turing test. You know, the Turing test was virtually a parlor test, really, and it's something that a lot of people have, you know, argued about over the decades whether or not it's a good test to put and so on. But I'm never been so sure. I see where he's coming from, because that's one of the first things you would think of when, if a robot or a bot in this case becomes indistinguishable from a human being to most people. Well, we've passed that point, really. If Lambda is, as I've seen and as the transcripts put in place and as the demonstrations of Google have put up, is as good as what it's supposed to do and how it is, and as good as it's being projected to be, we've already passed that point. But as I said in my video, I went down the route of basically, but that's not passing a test where we can't tell the difference as humans, because we can. You can talk to an AI all day long, most of us do, and you can tell by its responses that it's not human. It won't admit to being wrong, it won't admit to not knowing, it won't admit to not be able to do a mathematical computation, which a human would take hours to do on pen and paper and calculator and so on, but where a machine will do it immediately. Now that would be the biggest problem with trying to fool somebody that it's a human being, as Alan Turing's theory goes. Now we've gone past the point of AI not being able to simulate a human in its responses, but simulating a human being and not being able to tell the difference, we're still a long way off. We're still quite a long way off, really, and we've got to have a fallible system to be able to fool a human being, a system that says, I have no idea how I'm going to do that calculation. But is that what we want? Do we want our assistants to be, for want of a better term, as dumb as we are? Do we want our assistants to only know what we know? Do we want our digital assistants not to be the all-encompassing directory and database that we are actually pointing them in the direction to be? Now, I guess we don't. I think we will always want them to be technically smarter in its responses than a human is, because it's pulling data from databases and so on, and various sources and Wikipedia and all this kind of thing, to give you the answers that you were looking for. You don't want it to go, I haven't got a clue, mate, because it's never going to be something that we as a society will want. Now, those two videos on that, the first video was going through the responses and the actual dialogue between both Blake and Lambda, and then the second one was going through his interview, his TV interview, and most of it was literally, let's avoid the question, let's deflect, let's take it down a different route and not particularly answer a question. Oh, let's admit that it is a chatbot, and then let's admit that I don't really know if it's sentient or not. So it was a bit of a weird thing to watch, really, because if you go down a route and you're 100% certain whether you're right or wrong about the route you're about to take, and you announce to the world, because you are 100% certain that a certain machine is sentient and so on, or self-aware, then you don't backtrack, you know, off the very simplest questioning by someone who was very good at her job when she questioned him, but wasn't a technical person. So she was asking questions that people in general wanted to know, and he didn't have an answer for them. And it was a very good interview from the interviewer's part. She didn't let him off the hook very much, unlike the Tucker Carlson interview, which glossed over the whole thing and let him completely and utterly off the hook. There was no questions about anything that could have raised any suspicion about his real kind of thoughts on Lambda, other than, I want to be a sensationalist. That's where I thought he was coming from, really, and that's what it looked and appeared like. So yeah, those two videos were different, but it had to be done. You know, you got to do it from the flip side of the coin, and that's where I'm looking at whether his answers were good or bad. I did say in the videos that some were good, some were bad, some were nonsensical, and if I agreed with them, again, I would say that. So it's not a case of I have a particular point of view. I'm just answering his questions, filling in his blanks. And then the last one was the old school MIDI festival, basically at the Cambridge Computer History Museum, and it was something I was quite looking forward to. As you could probably tell, I'm into my old school MIDI stuff and keyboards and all that kind of thing, but I kind of hoped it was going to be a little bit better than it was. Now, the retro computer festivals over the last few years have been quite good. The 2019 one was really good, and you know, obviously the pandemic got in the way, and then they had one last year which was all right. It was starting to get people back into them, starting to pull the crowds kind of back in again. It wasn't as busy, which you'd expect, but this one was something that I would have thought would have kind of appealed to musicians and the retro geeks and the retrophiles, etc., but it didn't appear to be. So if you see my video, it's quite empty. There was a lot of stuff on display, but there wasn't very much being played or demonstrated. There was a lot of kit that, you know, you would have liked to have had a go of, but obviously it's other people's kit, so you know, they're quite guarded about it, which is fine, I understand that. So no one was really getting any hands-on with any of the kit. A lot of the kit there was stuff that, you know, people aspire to own, but there wasn't anybody talking about it, as in standing up and going, this is my Yamaha whatever, and it does this and it does this, or my Fairlight and my, you know, my Moog, and this is how it works and so on. But none of that was there. It was more of a, people had bought the stuff and then kind of wandered about, really, and it was a shame because it could have been very good. And I actually quite enjoyed seeing all of the old vintage and classic keyboards, seeing a working Moog, which was good, seeing a Fairlight there, seeing the bits and pieces that people had for sale and built, etc. And for me, that was good. That was quite interesting. And also Marcus came along because he's interested in this kind of stuff as well, and he enjoyed just fiddling with the Moog. And there's a bit on the old school electronic drum kit that he had a go on, which he's really into his drums, and it was nice. I didn't film that bit because I was doing something else, but he enjoyed that side of it. He enjoyed playing around with some of the instruments where he was allowed to, which was fantastic. But I do feel that really they should promote this one. It's not promoted, and I think that they should really hammer this one down a promotion line, because it appeals to more than just the retro computer people and the retro interest groups. But yeah, it was nice to see, it was nice to visit, and it's nice to see these kind of things starting up again after the years of being locked down and the years of not being able to do anything. It was a good meetup. I quite enjoyed it. Have a look at the video. It's a very short one. What I did is I did an introduction to what was there and the kind of different setups, which some of it's still behind me here, from vintage to modern, and I put some music to the retro keyboard video itself, because as I said, there wasn't a lot going on, but it was nice for, you know, people who watch his channel to view and see that kind of thing. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you enjoyed the little bit of kind of synthesized retro-ish music, okay, that went along with it. Okay, so anyway, this is the retro recap basically of the last month. There's been quite a lot. Have a look at some of the videos over the last month. You might find them interesting. You might want to point me down in different directions, which would be nice. You also might want to comment on them and then point out things that I may have missed and, you know, may not have known, which is great. And I really do like a lot of your comments on there, and they do point me in the right direction. You might have comments about RetroBrighting. You might also have comments about painting, and also Blake Lemoyne. Jump onto those videos, have a look, comment away, tell me if I'm right or I'm wrong. The whole point of those videos is to start a debate. Okay, so to debate, not an argument. So polite comments, polite debates is always welcome. So thanks a lot. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you soon. Please subscribe, and I'll see you later. Thank you. Bye bye.